All right, so you've made it to the end of the Power Query section. Nicely done. I like to end each section with a set of best practices, which are essentially tips and tricks that I've learned along the way that I think are helpful for you to keep in mind as well. So, Power Query best practice number one, we've talked about this before. Give your queries clear and intuitive table names before loading the data. So, define those tables immediately because updating them down the line can be a real headache, especially if you've referenced them in all sorts of calculated fields and measures. Second, just avoid using spaces in your table names, otherwise, you've got to surround them with those single quotes. Best practice number two, do as much shaping as possible at the source of the data. Now, this is kind of a new one. It's one that we haven't really talked about much because it's not quite as relevant when you're dealing with flat files like CSVs. But the point is, shaping your data at the source, like if you're pointing to a database like SQL or Access, minimizes the need for complex procedures and operations in Power Query. So if you need to create table joins or append new data or create complex calculated fields, it's always best to do that as close to the raw source of the data as you can. The other big benefit of doing that is that then you can point to that database and create a new model in a totally different workbook without having to replicate that entire Power Query process. So again, not as critical with the examples that we've shown, but definitely important if you start connecting to database sources. And then third best practice here, when you're working with very large tables, only load the data you need. So don't include hourly data when you'll only ever need daily, and don't include product level transactions when all you want to do is roll up performance by store. So that extra data will only slow you down. Now, one big caveat to this point, generally speaking, granularity is a good thing because it's always easier to roll things up and to aggregate than it is to break things down. In fact, it's impossible to break things down when you don't have that deeper level of granularity available. So for smaller, more ad hoc projects, think of granularity as a good thing. This is more when you're working with very large tables, really pushing that processor and running complex calculations where those extra data columns are really going to slow things down. So there you go. Those are my Power Query best practices. Up next, we've got a quick quiz and then some homework assignments. And from there, we'll move right into Data Modeling 101. So stay tuned.